Okay, so today we're going to jump into something pretty wild.
Yeah.
We're talking about government investigations into UAPs and then, like, the strange stuff that's been going on for a long time at Skinwalker Ranch.
Yeah, Skinwalker Ranch, definitely.
It's one of those things where,
A
like,
lot of strangeness.
yeah, it's so strange. It's almost like, is it really true or is this just, you know,
Right.
but there's been so much written about it. And then you sent me over this book review
Yeah.
from the Journal of Scientific Exploration. And I got to say, this is a fascinating review of this book called Skinwalkers at the Pentagon.
Yeah, it's a really interesting deep dive into how the government got so interested in UAPs and the role that this one ranch might have actually played in all of this.
Yeah, so just as like a backdrop for people, back in 2017, the public found out
Right.
that the government had been investigating, what they call anomalous aerospace threats.
Right.
And we all found out because about $22 million had been allocated to this program. And most of that money went to Robert Bigelow's aerospace company. And that was all because of Senator Harry Reid's, long-standing interest in UFOs.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, this was the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, or AATIP,
Right.
which ran from 2007 to 2012.
Yeah.
But the review suggests there might be a little bit more to the story than just that name.
Well, one of the most fascinating things that the review brings up is the possibility that AATIP, this program that everyone was talking about, might have actually been a cover for a classified program called the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Applications Program.
Okay, so another acronym?
Another acronym, AAWSAP.
AAWSAP.
Okay.
And the book review points to this claim that there was a name switch back in 2009, supposedly through a letter from Harry Reid to the Deputy Secretary of Defense, to kind of give the public a different name.
So it's like a decoy program name.
It's kind of a decoy name, and this is something that had actually been done before with previous UFO studies.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, the review mentions, Project Saucer and Project Bear and those sorts of things as kind of like these public-facing names. But I guess the takeaway here is that transparency, even in these sensitive areas, is kind of crucial for maintaining public faith.
It really is.
And, these kinds of deceptions can really undermine that.
Yeah, and the review really points to the fact that, using pseudonyms and that kind of thing, I mean, it can protect information in the short term.
Yeah.
But when these things come to light later on, it can really damage public trust.
Oh, yeah.
Especially for people who are actively seeking information, through things like FOIA requests.
Right, right. And I mean, if people thought that, AATIP was the main program.
Right, exactly.
They'd be filing, Freedom of Information Act requests under that name.
Right.
But if that was just this kind of public front,
exactly,
then, they're aiming at the wrong target.
They're aiming at something that wasn't the real core of the program, and then the government could legitimately say, we have no records under that name.
Right, right, because they changed the name and it's a different thing now.
And it's also worth remembering that agencies can cite exemptions under FOIA, particularly for things like national security or privacy, which can further complicate the process of actually getting information on these kinds of programs.
So it's really, even if there is a real desire for transparency, there are also these tools in place that can be used to kind of like, obfuscate and make it harder to really know what's going on.
Right. It really highlights the challenges of public oversight in these really classified areas.
Okay, so let's get to the weird stuff now.
Let's get to the weird stuff.
Let's talk about Skinwalker Ranch and its alleged influence, because the book review makes this really strong statement that the government's renewed interest in UAPs was actually significantly driven by decades of these bizarre reports coming out of this ranch in Utah.
Yeah, and the review lists a lot of different things that have been reported there.
Yeah.
Disembodied voices, strange creatures, both flying and walking around, unexplained vortices that appear.
Yeah.
And then, of course, various aerial objects,
It's like the whole gamut.
It's the whole shebang.
I mean, you hear stories about werewolves and these frog creatures with alligator mouths and like glowing orbs and even golden Mobius strips. Just appearing like it sounds like more like, urban legend.
It does sound like that.
Than something that would get the Pentagon's attention.
It does.
But it seems like it did.
It did, and the reviewer is very skeptical about it. Even calling Skinwalker Ranch, paranormal Disneyland.
It's a great term.
Yeah.
But I guess the real question is, are these stories actually verifiable?
Right, and that's the key point here, is that, these stories, they sound really amazing, but are they actually verifiable?
Right.
And the reviewer is really questioning the lack of verification behind a lot of these claims. And that's really the disconnect that we see so often in this whole area,
Right.
There's anecdotal claims, and then there's verifiable scientific evidence.
Right. And I mean, especially if you're talking about the government investigating something.
Exactly.
Like, you would think that they would need more than just, stories. Right.
Exactly. They need something a little bit more concrete than that.
It makes you wonder, like, how do we get from the earlier UFO investigations, like Project Sign and Grudge and Blue Book, which were very much about national security threats,
Right.
Like, is this a foreign aircraft or something like that?
Right. Is this a real threat?
To this new approach where it seems like at least partially driven by these paranormal reports.
And that's one of the concerns that the book review really brings up.
Yeah.
Is that, this newer approach might be based on a much less rigorous standard of evidence. Yeah. And that's kind of worrying when we're talking about
it's a big deal.
Government investigations, yeah.
So you're saying these decades of often really bizarre stories from this one ranch might have actually played a significant role in how the government even thought about what these UAPs might be.
Yeah, it seems like the focus kind of shifted from, could this be a foreign power, to, could this be something paranormal?
Which is a pretty big leap.
It is a huge leap.
And of course, whenever we talk about government investigations, we always end up in this soup of acronyms, right?
Oh, yeah.
You can't avoid it.
The alphabet soup of government acronyms is a very familiar thing.
Yeah, the reviewer actually mentions how, decades ago,
right?
When they were looking at Project Blue Book FOIA releases,
yeah,
they encountered the exact same thing.
That's just kind of how it is with government work.
Yeah, and I mean, it's understandable that there's a need for some secrecy, especially when it comes to national security.
Yeah, you have to protect your methods, your sources,
Your people.
Your people. But we also know that secrecy can be used for other things.
Right.
Not always good things. Not always the best reasons, no.
Like avoiding scrutiny of past mistakes or, mishandling of information. It's a double-edged sword.
It can be, yeah.
But the review does mention this potentially positive development that has come out of all of this.
What's that?
That there's been this increase in reports of strange aerial phenomena from U.S. Navy personnel.
Right.
And this has led to a more concerted effort to actually track and analyze these events.
That's a good thing.
Yeah. Whether they turn out to be, advanced foreign tech or something, totally unknown.
Yeah.
So it seems like AAWSAP, in partnership with Bigelow Aerospace, wasn't just looking at recent events.
No, they weren't.
They were digging way back. They even mentioned those 1975 overflights that happened off the coast,
Right.
And going all the way back to the 1940s.
Yeah, it's a very broad historical interest that they had.
Yeah, which suggests that, they're looking for a pattern over time.
Right.
And the book also delves into phenomenology.
Yeah.
Like looking at specific types of UAPs that are reported, like the flying triangles.
Yeah, the triangles and the orbs.
And the orbs.
Yeah.
These are patterns that keep popping up.
They keep popping up, yeah.
The review mentions this one Georgia Triangle incident.
Right.
That supposedly matches entries in this NID's low-flying triangle database. But what's really striking is the claim of radiation.
Oh, wow.
Causing all sorts of medical injury.
A plethora of medical injuries.
Yeah. And this Men in Black type encounter with Homeland Security.
Oh, wow.
But here's the catch. IPO laws prevented them from releasing any witness details.
Which makes it very difficult to independently verify.
So you can't really verify it.
It's hard, yeah. And I mean, high pay is designed to protect individual health information, so it's understandable that, they wouldn't release specific medical records.
Yeah.
But the question then becomes, were these medical issues actually caused by this triangle, or was there some other explanation? And that's something that the book, might lean one way, but without the specifics, we really can't say.
Okay. So let's dig into Skinwalker Ranch itself.
Okay.
Now, Robert Bigelow, who we mentioned before, well known for his interest in UFOs.
Yeah.
And the paranormal, he actually bought the ranch.
He did.
And in 1995, he created the National Institute for Discovery Science.
NIDs.
Or NIDS.
Yeah.
To investigate the paranormal activity there. And that's kind of when it really entered the public consciousness. I mean,
Right?
this place has been associated with so much weird stuff.
Oh, yeah. It's the whole range of weirdness, you know?
UFOs, electromagnetic effects, cattle mutilations, unexplained portals,
Mm.
all sorts of strange creatures, ghosts,
Yeah.
poltergeists, you name it.
Destructive energy radiation. I mean, it really runs the gamut.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
And the review shares some pretty wild examples, some from the book itself,
Right.
and even from the reviewer's own interactions, like this golden Mobius strip that appeared and vanished, and then
That's a new...
animals that seemed immune to bullets. And then this ranch employee had this story about a frog with an alligator's mouth.
Yeah, that's a classic.
And then there's that really famous dino beaver sighting.
Oh, the dino beaver. Yeah.
By the NIDS investigator Colm Kelleher.
Right.
And DIA analyst Juliet Witt. Like this 150-pound spined creature with a beaver-like tail that supposedly glided silently.
A gliding dino beaver.
A gliding dino beaver.
I've never heard that one before.
But I think the important thing to point out here is that, as the review does, that there is a real lack of photographic or other solid evidence.
Yeah.
In many of these accounts.
That's the recurring theme, unfortunately.
Yeah, so while the stories themselves are really sensational.
They are?
Without that verifiable data, it makes it really difficult to assess scientifically.
Right. They're very difficult to analyze in any kind of rigorous way.
And it's not even like the weirdness stays at the ranch.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Juliet Witt, the DIA analyst who reportedly saw the dino beaver, she also experienced paranormal activity at her own home later.
Oh, wow.
Including this figure that just vanished, and then this encounter with a large owl that left marks on her car.
Like scratches or something.
Yeah, something like that.
Wow.
And the review mentions that there didn't seem to be any kind of follow-up analysis on those owl marks.
It seems like that would have been something to look into.
Yeah, like was there any kind of, DNA or anything like that,
Right. Could you identify the owl, or was there something else going on there?
Exactly.
Interesting.
So this brings us to this concept of the hitchhiker effect.
No, the hitchhiker effect, yeah.
Which is discussed in the book, and the idea is that these anomalies from Skinwalker Ranch are somehow transmissible to witnesses.
So they kind of follow you home?
They follow you home and cause similar effects in other locations.
That's a little creepy.
Yeah, a little bit. And the book claims that there was this group of DIA personnel who visited the ranch early on in the AAWSAP inquiries, and they all supposedly brought something home with them.
Not in a good way.
Yeah, and not in a good way. Like the leader of the group was called Axelrod, and he reportedly, his family experienced visions of colored orbs and dogmen and poltergeist activity and black shatter people.
That's quite a collection.
Yeah, it's a lot. And again, the review highlights how difficult it is to verify these claims because the witnesses are anonymous.
Right.
And there's this lack of concrete physical evidence.
Right. So how do you really know what's going on?
Exactly. Are these experiences really linked to the ranch, or is there, some other explanation?
Right. Are there psychological factors at play, or is there something else going on that we're not considering?
And the review also touches on this idea that this hitchhiker effect has some kind of intelligence.
Intelligence?
Yeah, that it judges the mental state of observers. And maybe even punishes them if they don't treat the phenomenon with enough respect.
So it's kind of like a moral component to it?
Yeah, like it knows what you're thinking.
That's a very strange concept.
Yeah, it is, and it's really difficult to prove.
Say the least.
And the review mentions how Skinwalker investigators invoked IPAW laws to prevent questioning of witnesses.
Oh, wow.
About medical evidence related to this hitchhiker effect. So again, it makes it difficult.
It's hard to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, to really investigate independently what might have happened.
Yeah, and it means invoking hypo like that, it kind of raises more questions than it answers.
Right, right. And then there's Dr. Travis Taylor, who's the lead investigator for The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch.
Yeah, the TV show.
The TV show. He claims to have been hit by radiation at the ranch.
Oh, wow.
And believes he's also a victim of the hitchhiker effect. So this raises some pretty serious questions because, as the review points out, if there was this genuinely dangerous radiation present,
right,
why hasn't the ranch been declared, biologically restricted area?
Right, it's a good question.
By federal authorities.
Yeah, you would think that they would take some action.
And there's also this lack of peer-reviewed medical research documenting these alleged conditions.
Yeah, that's a noticeable absence for sure.
And Taylor's comment about being afraid to even talk about the hitchhiker for fear of triggering it.
Yeah, that's a bit odd.
Yeah, it adds this whole other layer of complexity that kind of borders on the superstitious.
It really does.
But maybe one of the most significant points that the review raises...
What's that?
is that Dr. Travis Taylor, who is, the public face of Skinwalker Ranch on television,
Right.
was also the chief scientist for the UAP Task Force report in 2021.
Oh, wow.
So that's a little bit of a conflict of interest, wouldn't you say?
It does seem like there could be a conflict of interest there.
Because you've got someone whose career is tied to maintaining this mystery
Right.
and intrigue of Skinwalker Ranch.
Right.
Also in a key position to assess and report on UAP events for the government.
It's a very powerful position to be in.
Yeah, and the reviews suggest that this could have created an incentive to maybe inflate the number of unidentified reports to keep that mystery alive.
To keep the public interested.
Yeah, both for the TV show and for continued interest in UAPs generally.
Yeah, it makes sense from a certain perspective.
Yeah, and the 2021 UAP Task Force report stated that 143 out of 144 reports were unidentified.
Wow.
That's a 99.3%.
That's incredibly high.
Which is much higher than in previous investigations.
So something's going on there.
Yeah, but because these were primarily military reports gathered for national security reasons,
right,
they're not publicly available for independent study.
So we can't really verify why that number is so high.
Yeah, and as the reviewer points out, without that independent scrutiny,
right,
the conclusions of the UAPTF report have to be viewed with some skepticism.
Yeah, there's always the possibility of bias.
Right.
Especially when you have someone like Travis Taylor involved.
Finally, the review mentions this statement from Brandon Fugel, who's the current owner of Skinwalker Ranch. And in 2022, he described his acquisition of the property as part of a religious journey or a spiritual journey. So maybe that offers a different lens through which to view all of this.
Yeah, maybe it's not all about, scientific data and government investigation, but maybe there's something else going on there, something more personal.
Exactly.
That's fascinating.
So to kind of sum all this up, this deep dive into the book review has revealed this really interesting and kind of troubling situation. Skinwalker Ranch, with its long history of strange and often unverified claims, seems to have had this really significant impact on the government's renewed focus on UAPs.
Yeah.
And the funding of these investigations.
Yeah, it's quite a connection.
And the fact that these anecdotal accounts might have influenced official government inquiries is pretty concerning.
Yeah, it raises some serious questions about, the rigor and the objectivity of these investigations.
And then you have the potential for bias, the lack of verifiable evidence for many of the claims, the secrecy surrounding these programs.
Right.
It all adds up to a very complex and confusing picture.
It really does.
So we've explored this intersection of government investigations, UAPs, and the enigma of Skinwalker Ranch. And considering this mix of classified programs, anecdotal paranormal claims, the individuals involved, what stands out to you as the most thought-provoking aspect of all of this?
That's a good question.
What questions remain unanswered for you about the true nature of UAPs and places like Skinwalker Ranch?
Yeah, is it all just, misidentification and hoaxes, or is there something more to it?
Is the pursuit of understanding driven by genuine scientific inquiry, legitimate national security concerns, or maybe something else entirely?
Yeah, I think that's something for everyone to ponder.
Definitely food for thought.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been a really interesting conversation.
Yeah.
I appreciate you, bringing this book review to my attention.
Oh, you're welcome.
And I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about.
A lot to chew on.
Definitely.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for listening, everyone.
See you next time.